So we've seen some examples of price discrimination. In this video, we're going to look at why a monopoly might want to price discriminate. So a monopoly will want to price discriminate if it increases their profit. So we're going to use a diagram to see how a monopoly can increase its profit through price discrimination. So in the diagram, we have a demand curve, a marginal revenue curve, and a marginal cost curve. So here I've assumed that the marginal cost curve is horizontal and the value of marginal cost is C. So it costs the monopoly C per unit it produces. The demand curve here, it's a straight line, and the marginal revenue curve is therefore also a straight line. But also the marginal revenue curve has the same intercept as the demand curve and is twice the slope. So this is a fact you should remember, and you've probably seen this in microeconomics. So because the marginal revenue is twice the slope of the demand curve, this intercept here is halfway between the intercept of the demand curve and 0. Now let's start by looking at what price and quantity the monopoly would choose to maximize its profit if it priced uniformly. That is, if every unit it sells sold for the same price, regardless of who bought it and how many units they purchased. So, a monopoly will choose to produce where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. So that's at this point here. So let's mark off the quantity and the price. So the U here stands for uniform. So these are the optimal uniform price and the uniform price and quantity. Let's also mark off the competitive quantity, or the welfare maximizing quantity, because we know that perfect competition maximizes welfare. So under perfect competition, the price is going to be equal to marginal cost. So the competitive price is equal to marginal cost, and the competitive quantity is where the marginal cost curve crosses the demand curve here at QC. Now, one fact that's going to be useful later on is that QU is half QC. So the uniform price and quantity of a monopolist is half the competitive quantity. Okay, so to look at the motivation of the monopoly to price discriminate, let's find the profit of the monopoly under uniform pricing. So under uniform pricing, the monopoly sells QU, charges PU, and it costs C per unit to produce. So the profit is going to be the quantity multiplied by the difference between the price and the cost. So it's this rectangle here. So I'm going to call this area G. So G is the profit under uniform pricing. Now let's identify two other areas on this diagram. So under competitive pricing, welfare is going to be the area under the demand curve, above the marginal cost curve, from 0 up to the quantity here. So it's this big triangle. So let's label the two other areas in this triangle, E and F. So this is E, and this is F. So what are these two areas? Well, let's look at F first. What is the welfare under uniform pricing with a monopolist? Well, it's the area under the demand curve and above the marginal cost curve between 0 and the quantity of the uniform pricing monopolist. So the welfare is only E plus G. Now E, what's that? That's consumer surplus under uniform pricing. So the welfare under uniform pricing is made up of areas E plus G, the consumer surplus, plus the profit. So what is area F? F is the difference between the welfare under perfect competition, maximized welfare, and the welfare under uniform pricing with a monopoly. So F is what's called the deadweight loss. So why are we interested in these areas? Well, area E, let's look at that first. Area E is potential profit for the monopoly. So we notice these units from 0 up to QU. What are consumers willing to pay for each of these units? Well, the demand curve tells us the maximum they're willing to pay for each of these units. And you can see that the amount they're willing to pay for these units is actually more than what they're actually paying, PU. So because the consumers are getting some consumer surplus, they're paying less than they're willing to pay. So E is potential profit. So if the monopoly could charge different price for each of these units along here, then they might be able to capture some of area E or all of area E as profit. So this is potential profit because consumers are willing to pay more than PU for those units. Now what about area F? Well, area F is also potential profit. Now these units between QU and QC, well, they're not being sold by their monopolist. The consumers are willing to pay more than the marginal cost because the demand curve is above the marginal cost curve. So the monopolist could potentially sell these units to consumers for more than it costs them to produce. Now the reason they don't under uniform pricing is because to sell these units, they would have to lower the price on all the other units they're selling, and it's not worthwhile doing that because the marginal revenue of these units is less than the marginal cost. So what we've seen is that a uniform pricing monopolist is losing out on potential profit, these areas E and F. And by charging different prices for different units, potentially they could increase their profit. So the monopolist would like to charge more for these units than it's charging under the uniform pricing, and it would like to charge less for these units than it does under uniform pricing, so it could sell these units as well as these units. So what we found is that a monopoly may be able to increase its profit over uniform pricing by using non-uniform pricing, price discrimination. So there are different types of price discrimination, and we're going to look at all of them. So we're going to look at first degree price discrimination, where the monopolist is able to extract all the surplus from the consumer, that is, charge exactly what each consumer is willing to pay. We're going to look at third degree price discrimination, where the monopoly charges different prices based on some observable indicator. So examples of this, we saw the example with real cinema there. The different price was based on age, but the price could also be based on the place where people are located. So there could be geographical market segmentation. So a firm might charge different prices based on the country or the region in which someone lives. So this would be third degree price discrimination as long as the difference in prices is not due to differences in costs. We saw the example of special discounts with ages. And then we're going to look at the main idea there, which is that the monopolist should apply an elasticity rule. And essentially they're going to charge a lower price to those that are more price sensitive. And then finally there's second degree price discrimination. So this is where a market segment can't be identified directly, so it's not possible to distinguish between different types of buyers and charge them or offer them different prices. And examples of this, we saw the example of broadband, but you see this a lot with phone plans. And there are many more examples. This is the most common type of price discrimination. So the idea here is to offer options to consumers that will pay as close as possible to what they're willing to pay. Now I should note that all of these types of price discrimination require that it's not possible or it's costly to resell to someone else. So this is necessary because, for example, if we think about movie tickets, if you could easily buy a ticket at the student price and resell it to someone, to an adult, at a higher price, then you would be able to make some money. There'd be an opportunity for what's called arbitrage. Generally, people don't do this because it's maybe it's embarrassing or it's costly. You have to wait around in the movie theater and try and sell tickets to people. I guess you could try and sell them online or some other way, but it's probably not worth it because the difference in the prices is not that large in most cases.